It's a task force of the willing, and it's a task force of all volunteers.
I just felt like I had to go.
They said, hey, can you help us out? We need some political connections here for this thing. We're gonna go and save orphans. And I'm like, man, I'll do that in a heartbeat.
I wanted to do something, I didn't know what to do.
And we said, hey, we have the means, we have the ability, we have the passion, we have the know-how to do this. Let's just press forward and do it.
There's over 3,500 kids in Afghanistan that are trapped and need to get out. I have a plan to get them all out in the next 96 hours. Can you come help me? And I was like, all right. This challenge in particular was a little bit different, given the circumstances of Kabul.
The technical and tactical tradecraft and skills that combined collectively ended up being the perfect team to do this mission of getting people out.
Everything just kind of came together with that kind of experience hitting the ground at the same time.
Kabul during the largest evacuation in its history, while the Taliban is coming to kill everyone trying to get out, this is a different level of non-permissive.
And within a period of a few days, we had about 15,000, I'm probably underestimating, emails come in, messages come in with people saying they needed help.
I haven't been on the ground 15 minutes, and I'm walking into Taliban-held territory trying to ID their checkpoints so we can figure out our rat lines past them.
And if you have the ability to help someone, then you have to.
The only necessary thing for the triumph of evil is for good men to do nothing. There's still a lot of people on the ground that need to get out. There's nobody coming to help them. Well, that's a problem.
We have to structure multiple nonprofit organizations under a group, a coalition effort that we're calling Save Our Allies.
You know, sometimes you just have to say, like, who else is going to do it? I was either going to be sitting on my couch or I was going to be one of the 12 people that was making it a little more American.
If you have that thing in you that is calling you to action, don't ignore it, you're gonna regret it. Do something about it, but you gotta do it now. Go do something.
Thank you, guys. Thank you so much. Thank you. Well, I get to proudly stand up here as someone that representative of so many amazing people that was part of this. The 12 people were on our team, the amazing nonprofits around the world and just people around the world that supported us. This church, if you guys don't know, this church was huge part of what we did. Pastor Ron's on our board at Mighty Oaks Foundation decided to allow me to do this. We have some incredible members of this church who financially contributed to the possibilities of doing this, and then many of you prayed for us, and it's probably no more significant thing than prayers, especially in that moment. We were talking as a team, and we were like, we could literally feel the prayers of people praying for us while we were there doing this work. And so thank you for being part of that. Thank you as a church. Thanks, Pastor Ron, and all of you again for being part of that. Before I start the message, I want to take a moment to acknowledge Memorial Day. I will say Happy Memorial Day. I know a lot of people don't know how to handle that. They're like, is it a happy day? Should we say Happy Memorial Day? And I always, as a veteran, don't want people to walk on eggshells and worry about what to say if they're going to say the wrong thing. I believe it is a happy day. It's a day that we mourn families, members that have lost loved ones, but it's a day that we celebrate the freedoms that we could celebrate and live what they actually died for. And that's the freedom to be here in a place like this and freely worship. If you don't know, we're part of only 25% of the world's population that are allowed to do this on a Sunday morning. And that's because of our brave men and women that have donned the uniform since 1775 and fought, bled, and died for those freedoms. And so that is something to be happy about. It's something to barbecue about and celebrate. Coming from a place like Afghanistan recently and some of the places I've been in the last few months, I will say that despite what you see in the news and despite how divided our country is right now, this country still is the greatest country on the planet, no question. So that last slide, that my social media team did a funny thing, and they put the Taliban camp there behind us. Anytime you're in front of 100 yards away from the Taliban, you have to take a selfie. But if you notice right before that, they had the verse, and the verse is Isaiah 6:8, which is a very powerful verse. And then I heard a voice from the Lord saying, "Whom shall I send, and who will go for us?" And then I said, "Here am I, send me." And for the 12 of us that actually went and did that work, that was the heart that all of us shared. This is burden on our heart, saying these people need help. No one's going to go help them. You might ask, why wouldn't the military go? Why did veterans have to go? Because the military wasn't allowed to. Then the next best qualified was the veteran community, and so we had that burden on our heart to go help, and we answered that call and said, here am I, send me. I believe that verse is powerful. I believe that verse is something that probably at some point in our lives stirs in all of us to do something profound for God and for others. But when you really have that calling in your life, I feel that burden God puts on you, and you step forward to do something, you start to feel doubt. You maybe feel unqualified or inadequate. Maybe because of your past failures or your experiences or lack of experiences, your fears and insecurities, right? There's two voices that really speak in your head. There's a voice of truth, God calling you and burdening you and saying, I need you to do this. And then there's a voice of the enemy that we speak to ourselves, or the enemy speaks to us saying, you're not qualified to do this. You failed before. Because of the decisions you make in your life right now, you can't do these certain things. And we all battle with that, right? Anybody else ever feel that way? I know I do, and especially this last year and being involved in some of these things, I certainly felt that way. What we did in Afghanistan, I will say with complete humility, it was a very incredible thing. It was amazing to be able to help that many people. But the truth is, it was beyond our personal ability. I don't have the capability or intellect or organizational skills to pull something like that off. I don't. No one on our team did. What happened there was completely divine in nature, and there's no way to explain it. I've been asked so many times on news stations and in interviews, how'd you guys do that? I mean, the things we pulled together in just days to be able to get there, have the access and help those people. How we do it? And the only way I can really explain it is the miraculous things that we've seen was orchestrated completely by God. And that's the only way to explain it. So the title of this message is The Warrior Within, which is the Spirit of God, the warrior Spirit of God that He's sown into us, right? It's the Spirit that stirs us and burdens us and calls us to do courageous things. And most importantly, the Spirit that equips us to do the fight, to do the battles that God has called us to do and fight the battles in this world on His behalf. So as I talk today and tell you a little bit about this story, I don't really want to focus on our team's achievements there. What I want to focus on is our weaknesses, our inadequacies, and why, for me specifically, I should never have been part of such an amazing thing like this. But despite all those things, how God used us anyway. And in the Bible, in 2 Corinthians 11:30, it says, "If I must boast, I will boast on the things that show my weakness." Right? So why is that? Because if we're able to do things on our own, well, then God gets the credit. But the things of God aren't meant to be done on our own. They're meant to be done by God, and He uses us. He allows us to take part. So if we talk about our weaknesses in that, what that actually does when we boast about them is it gives Him credit, and that's where it belongs. And certainly is the case for Afghanistan. God certainly gets the credit for that because, again, it's nothing we could have pulled off. So with Afghanistan, why would someone like me feel inadequate to do such a mission? I mean, just look at my background. On paper, I have everything it would take to be chosen to do something like this. I worked my whole life since I was a kid to make it in special operations. I was a recon Marine. I'm at the Force Recon. I went to JSOC Task Force. Got the privilege to serve at the premier Special Operations Unit. Did 8 deployments there. I had a lot of experience. So on paper, I'm qualified to do this. So why would I feel so inadequate and disqualified to be able to do something like this? Why would I have those insecurities? Well, it's because of my history, right? I had successes in the military, but also had many failures. And if you guys have heard my story, and I know a lot of you have, I came home from my last deployment, my 8th deployment from Afghanistan, and really dealt with a lot of difficult things. I was diagnosed with PTSD. I dealt with debilitating panic attacks, anxiety, depression, to the point to where I was in such a dark place that I attempted to take my life. So there was a bad history of knowing what I was capable of and also knowing what I was not capable of. And going to Afghanistan, back to Afghanistan, the last time I had been there was very bad. Lost friends. The last time I went to the country of Abu Dhabi, which was where we're headed to start this operation, the last time I had been to, actually UAE, Dubai, I was fighting for my life. I was dealing with these panic attacks, and then I got home 3 years later, had this recovery through a relationship with Christ. But even afterwards, even after I started Mighty Oaks, I dealt with panic attacks. And if anybody's dealt with panic attacks, I mean, they're terrible, they're debilitating. I mean, after Mighty Oaks, after times I've come spoken at this church, I found myself in the hospital with blood pressure, 200 over 130, dealing with panic attacks, like stroke level blood pressure. I mean, this is something that I have dealt with over the years. And so now I'm gonna put myself back in this environment, and I have to ask myself, like, am I gonna deal with this again? And I thought about it before we left, and I realized for the last 11 years, I've been going to speak to our troops on resiliency. I've spoken to over 250,000 troops on the 4 pillars of resiliency. That's how the military breaks it down: mind, body, spirit, and social. Being mentally tough, being physically tough, having a strong support network, a social network, and having a strong spiritual foundation. And I talk to these troops, again, like 250,000 of them. Every month I go do this, different bases around the world. And I talk to them about a time in my life where I went to Afghanistan as part of a JSOC task force, and I had 3 of those 4 pillars, right? Mentally, I was sharp. Physically, I was in the best shape of my life. I felt like I could do anything. And socially, I was with the best guys I could serve with, but that spiritual pillar, I didn't have it. Because I didn't have it, the hardships of combat, the hardships of life almost cost me everything. And I stand in front of them and tell them, and I've told them for the last 10 years, if I would have had that spiritual pillar, if I'd had all 4 of those, I would have not only been able to do my job even better, but I would have walked away from it just fine. And as I'm speaking, and you can too, right? That's my pitch to them. And you can do it too, right? If you have all 4 of those pillars, you're gonna be able to be combat ready. You're gonna be able to be resilient to the battlefields of life, of combat or of life. Like, you're gonna be good. You're gonna be able to come back home from those battles and be quality husbands and wives and parents and friends and eventually civilians again. And I believed that pitch that I had been giving, but now I had realized that's kind of in theory. Like, I've been talking about it, but I only experienced without God, and now I'm gonna have the chance to do it with God. And it really was like kind of convicting to me, like, and I thought, well, this is what I've been preaching, I'm gonna have to live it out. And I got on that plane and I went. And I'll tell you why I went, kind of step back why I went in the first place. It was a little bit selfish why I started this effort to go to Afghanistan and help these people. It was because of my personal interpreter, Aziz. If anybody's read some of my books before, I know some of you have read An Unfair Advantage, I mentioned Aziz by the name Bashir to protect his identity. Aziz was not only my interpreter, but he became my teammate and my friend. We did all 8 of my deployments together. We would go out on operations, just the 2 of us. We'd go in Pakistan, in the mountains of Afghanistan, and in Taliban villages, and literally he saved my life like 3 times in 3 specific incidents. However, I believed he saved my life like every day, every moment. Like, don't eat that, don't touch that, don't step there, like, don't talk to that person. Shut your mouth so someone doesn't know who you are. Like, every moment he was like protecting me. And I mean, we walk around a corner in the middle of the night in the village, like, he didn't let me go first, even though I had more military experience than him, because he felt responsible for me. He always put his life before mine. He was my friend. I love this guy. When we got back from operations, I didn't go to a base and he went home. I lived in his house. I played with his children and his nieces and nephews. I ate with his family. I held his first son when his son was born. And so I love this guy. So after a decade of him serving in our country in special operations, we had made promises to these people like Aziz, that we would put them in a special immigrant visa process into a 9-month process for them to be able to come as part of their contract and become American citizens for their service to our country. And we didn't come through on it. We left them there. And we were withdrawing. We were leaving Afghanistan, leaving all those people behind, Americans, interpreters, their families. innocent people. And I had been trying to get Aziz out of that process for 6 years. And I knew, the time was up and his life would have been taken because of what he did for me and what he did for all of us in our country. And I was not okay with that. And I was going to go get him. So I contacted some of my friends that you've seen that video. And I said, we have to go get Aziz. And they said yes. We put our team together. And as we're putting our team together, you see one of those guys with the blurred faces in the video said, hey, I identified this group of 3,500 orphans. Getting Aziz is great, but let's get these 3,500 kids. Then we kind of paused for a minute and we were like, if we're going to get Aziz and his family, if we're going to get these 3,500 kids, we have an amazing team with some incredible experience. We're not just a bunch of old timers. We had some incredible experience. Some guys that are currently working for government agencies that I won't say here, but like they very qualified to do the job. Like we have the right team to make a real impact here, and let's get as many people as we can. Let's get as many Americans, interpreters, their families, women that would be vulnerable, children that would be vulnerable, Christians that would be persecuted. And so we decided to go all in, and we started soliciting help. And in a very short period of time, like days, we were able to get all the support we needed. One of the people we reached out to was a friend of mine, Glenn Beck. If you guys know Glenn Beck from the radio, he had raised a bunch of money to help in this effort really quickly. He allocated about $20 million to us for flights, to handle some of the charter flights, because the flights were very expensive at the time. They were like $800,000 per flight. And then I reached out through a friend on our team who had a relationship with the royal family of the United Arab Emirates, which is where the city Dubai is. Most people know Dubai more than UAE. But we reached out to that family, the royal family there. We asked for support, and within an hour brief, they were all in. They gave us 2 C-17 planes, which are the big military planes, and pilots to fly them. And they gave us what was most important, what we needed most, was a place to bring them to. Because if you could go into another country and fly people out, but if you don't have a visa for them, then you're trafficking them. You have to have a place to bring them. And a humanitarian center is a safe haven, like a kind of free zone to bring them to. And so they gave us access to the humanitarian center. In addition to that, through our military relationships, we were allowed to go to the Hamid Karzai International Airport in Kabul, Afghanistan, to land there and do operations. So we were allowed by our government to do that. So a lot of people would think like, man, you guys just went out there and did this on your own. You can't do that. You have to actually have permissions to go in a government-controlled area and fly people out. So we had everything kind of fell in place. God opened all the doors that seemed impossible. We landed in Abu Dhabi to set up our operations center and work the humanitarian center. We also landed in another parts of our team into Kabul on the airport there. And immediately we started sending 3-man teams outside the wire to sneak outside the wire in the middle of the night and go grab people and escort them back in. We're vetting them. It's a very meticulous process. The first day, we got Aziz and his wife and 6 kids into the airport safely. We got another 183 people. The next day, we got 800 people. And after that, it kind of became a blur because it was just, everything was happening so fast. We realized if we stopped for 1 hour, that was people's lives that were at stake. So we just couldn't stop. One of the guys in that video lost 37 pounds in 10 days just because we never stopped moving. And I don't think he ate or drank anything, and he just wouldn't stop moving. And when the Abbey Gate was blown up, which where 13 service members were killed and about 200 civilians were killed by a suicide bomber, the military welded the gate shut. 3 days later, the U.S. military left, and the dust kind of settled for us. And we didn't even realize at the time how many people we got out, but we had got 12,000 people out. For us, we felt like that was a big accomplishment, but that week was like so revealing of what the situation really was, that while our military was leaving, we knew we didn't have to, and we chose to stay. Because one thing was the most important to me was there was still thousands of Americans there. At the time, the news said, and the White House said there were 100 Americans still there, which we knew for a fact there was thousands of Americans. And the truth is, it didn't matter how many. If there was one American, we were going to stay, because you don't leave American behind anywhere. And so we chose to stay. We moved to a place called Mazar Sharif, and we started flying people out of Mazar Sharif for a couple of more weeks. We got about another 5,000 people out. The video said 15,000. We actually got 17,000 people total out. And then when the airstrip dried up, we had to make a decision what we're going to do next. And we knew that all of the people that escaped Kabul had moved to a place called the Panjshir Valley, and they were hiding there. There was a resistance force building up. And as they were hiding there, they wanted to cross the border, but they didn't know how. And when I say I didn't know how, you'd have to think of the geography there. It's a lot different than here. 25,000-foot mountains with treacherous valleys. It goes to the border, and on the border of Afghanistan to Tajikistan is the Panjshir River, which is a Category 5, like ice melt water, freezing temperatures. Some parts are Category 5 rapids. You might spend a whole week bringing the women and children through that valley, and you get to the end and you run into a Chinese checkpoint, or a Taliban checkpoint, or a 1,000-foot cliff, and you have to turn around and go back and probably not make it. Or the river is just too treacherous to cross. So they needed eyes on the other side to know where to go, to be able to cross. And so we decided to send a 2-man team. This was some specific kind of job that I did before. And so I brought Dennis Price, who's in the video. We showed Dennis Price. He was a Force Recon Marine as well. And the two of us went to Tajikistan, and we did 90 miles of border in about 10 days. And we built 6 crossings on the way out. And while we were flying there, this fear that I talk about, this voice of inadequacies and insecurities hit me. It's a long flight. There's a lot of time to think, especially when you're about to do something like that. And my mind started spinning and fear started to creep in. And I started thinking, man, what if I start having these physiological symptoms again? What if my blood pressure goes to 200 over 130 again while I'm out there? What if I have a stroke or a heart attack or something like that out there? What if I'm a liability dentist? 3 days before I had left for Afghanistan, I was trying to get my mind off of the busyness of just on my computer, planning, not even hydrating, just like busy. And I'm like, I got to get to the gym and just train to unplug. And a lot of you guys know I train jiu-jitsu, like a lot of people in this church. And so I went to the gym and I went to train just to get my mind off. And while I'm training, I did some stupid move and my groin muscle snapped off the bone. The longest muscle was snapped off the bone, and it was extremely painful. The next morning I went to get an MRI, and as I'm talking to the doctor, he says, you have to get emergency surgery. I said, I can't, I'm leaving for Afghanistan in 2 days. And he's like, no, you have to get emergency surgery. And I was like, well, let me ask some questions for him. I was like, one, if I just so happen to have to run to or from something, will I fall down? Like, will it work? And he's like, well, it'll work because you have 4 of the muscles, but it'll hurt really bad. And I was like, okay, well, can I make it any worse? And he's like, you can't make it any worse because it's already off the bone. So I was like, all right, good to go. So I went, and I still hadn't had the surgery, by the way, and I think it's too late now. But so I'm going there, all these thoughts in my mind. I'm like, man, I'm about to go and hike through these mountains. I'm going to swim across the river in Afghanistan. My groin muscle's not even attached. All this doubt started coming in. And I remembered again that talk I give to all these 250,000 troops over the years. And I just went right to God. I went right to that spiritual pillar that I've been talking about. And I just leaned on God and said, God, you burdened my heart to be on this plane flying over here and doing this. And not only did he burden my heart to do it, but he had orchestrated doors that were open that seemed impossible. I mean, you don't just get to go do something like this. A lot of us want to, but the things that happened to make it possible were a lot. And so God didn't only burden my heart, but he had orchestrated all the right things. So for me, it was very clear that God was in this. And I said, God, you put me in this position to do this, to help these people. I need you to take away any fear that I'm having, any anxiety, any stress, any physiological symptoms that I'm going to have, so that I can do this work that you're calling me to do. And it's really hard to describe because I never had it happen to me before. I've talked about it, heard talked about, but while I was on that plane, I had this amazing peace come over me. The Apostle Paul talks about it. He says a peace that's beyond it, being able to explain it. I had that come over me, and so much so that when we landed on a layover, I told Dennis about it. I was like, man, I just have so much peace right now. I was starting to get stressed out, and I leaned into God and just having so much peace right now. And he's a Christian, and so we prayed together. And while we were praying together, we both walked away, after praying, like, God, keep us safe, keep us awake, because we knew we were going to be not sleep for 10 days, and just let us be capable of doing this job, and give us what we need to do it. Don't let us have fear, anxiety, or anything like that. And I can tell you that in 10 days, Dennis and I both have attested to this, and we're not saying this like bragging at all, but I never felt scared. Dennis said he never felt scared the whole time. There were literally Chinese military everywhere, Russians were everywhere, Taliban were everywhere. We went 12 hours into those mountains. We couldn't even turn on any like cell phones or anything. As soon as you turn it on, like all of a sudden you have like, you're in the middle of mountains and you have like 5 bars on your phone, which means it's not a cell tower, it's like foreign intelligence trying to pick up your phone. And so it started getting calls from Russia. So we had to shut off all electronics, like no way to call for help. Like never had that fear. We never got tired. We were sleeping like 1 to 2 hours a night for like 10 days. So just this overwhelming peace this whole time doing this operation. And there was this one moment we were about to swim across the river into Afghanistan, because that's what we'd do it at night. We'd swim across the river in Afghanistan. And there was this one moment I was reached out on Instagram. I didn't say where I was going to be. What I would do is I'd video stuff, and then I would have it post like different time. So you guys would have seen it probably delayed. But I made this video, and I'm like sitting against these rocks, and I'm asking you guys that were following me to pray with me. I didn't tell you guys where I was or what I was doing. I asked you to pray with me for something we were about to do. We were about to swim across that river. And then I said a prayer on there, a psalm that I say all the time. I actually learned it in moments of anxiety in the past. I've memorized a lot of verses in my moments of anxiety. In Psalm 23, it's a psalm that's very important to me. It says, "The Lord is my shepherd. I lack nothing. He makes me lie down in green pastures, and he leads me beside quiet waters. He refreshes my soul. He guides me in the right path for his name's sake. And even though I should walk through the darkest valley, I will fear no evil, because he's with me, and his rod and his staff, they comfort me. He prepares a table for me in the presence of my enemies. He anoints my head with oil, and my cup overflows. And surely his goodness and love will pursue me all the days of my life." And that prayer has that psalm has a lot of powerful things in it. But to me, especially in that moment, the first verse is the most important. I think everybody leans on the shadow of the valley of death, but for me, that first one, "The Lord is my shepherd, I lack nothing." There's another version that says, "I have all that I need." The Lord is my shepherd, I have all that I need. Right? If we have God, we lack nothing. I didn't need a Vector gunship C-130 flight over me. It'd have been nice. But I didn't need that, right? I didn't need guns or ammunition or support. I had all that I needed to do that. And I had that peace to go across the river. And to explain what going across the river looked like, there was many crossings. We built 6 crossings, but one of them, for example, had like about 300 yards to the right of us was a Chinese BMP, which is a mechanized vehicle, with a PKM machine gun, a 7.62 caliber machine gun. 4 people crossing the river to shoot people across the river with 3 Chinese soldiers, and then a giant spotlight for people crossing the river. So that was that to our right, and to our left across the river was a Taliban, like in that picture there was a Taliban shack with like 3 Taliban soldiers on the top with AK-47s, and we had to move right through the middle of them. And then there was another spot we were crossing, and we were swimming across the river, and we had an Afghan escorting us across. And while we were swimming across, we were like 30 yards from the other side in the middle of this river, and a motorcycle drives across with 2 guys on it. And the guy says, "Those are Taliban scouts." And I remember in that moment thinking, even though I had this peace, just thinking, "God, what the heck do you have me in this river for? I'm 46 years old, I'm busted up, and I run a ministry. Like, what am I doing in this river?" And while we were successful and got to help a lot of people with building those routes, and I don't even know how many people got out because of those routes, I couldn't answer that question, why God had me there in that moment. But about 4 days later, when that operation was over, I found myself in San Diego at MCRD, Marine Corps Recruit Depot, which is Marine Corps Boot Camp. And I was back where I had been speaking for 7 years now. And I was speaking to 3,000 recruits. And now I'm talking about these 4 pillars of resiliency from a totally different angle, from a totally different perspective, because this time I'm able to tell them, hey, the first time I went, I had these 3 pillars, mind, body, spirit. Mind, body, social, but I didn't have the spiritual one and how destructive it was for me. But this time, I went and did this thing. 4 days ago, I was in this river, swimming across this river in Afghanistan. And my mind wasn't where it used to be. My body wasn't definitely where it used to be. Socially, like Dennis was amazing, but he wasn't much of a team. It was just one of him. But spiritually, I had that spiritual pillar through that relationship with Christ. And it was all that I needed. We're all going to have times like this in our life where we believe God's leading us to do something important. And it doesn't have to be something big like Afghanistan, right? It's whatever God's calling you to do. But because of our past, because of our experiences or inexperiences or our inadequacies, we disqualify ourselves because we're listening to that wrong voice. We're listening to that voice from the enemy, or that voice within ourselves of self-doubt that overshadows, if we let it, could overshadow that voice of truth. And again, it could be anything. It could be parenting, right? You could have a child that you love your kid so much, and you're like, I don't have what it takes to be the best mom or dad for this kid. Or in a relationship in your marriage, you're like, why can't I be the husband or wife that I should be? It could be like serving in church or in your community where you're like, man, if people knew what was really going on inside of me, if people knew the sin in my life, they would never let me work into this church. So you step out of serving in church where God wants you to be. You step out of serving your community or a job, you get an opportunity in your job and you're like, I just can't step up to that level because I'm not ready. Lack of obedience to God or in general not taking action, that's typically based out of fear. You know, in the Bible, in some form or another, the words do not fear is mentioned 365 times, one for every single day, because we need it. That fear comes from putting our trust in the wrong places, mainly putting trust in ourselves. Because when we attempt to trust ourselves, fear and doubt will always set in because we know ourselves. We know what we are capable of. We know what we're not capable of. We know our strengths. We know our weaknesses. We know what we can and cannot do. But you know who knows that better than us? Is God. He knows what our strengths are. He knows what our weaknesses are. He knows what we're not capable of. But he calls us anyway. You know, he knows us. The Bible says in Luke 12:7 that he knows the numbers of hairs on our head, which is extremely important to me because I know he's constantly present with me because the number of hairs on my head change every minute. In fact, last night I was at the Rose District and this guy, you guys may know him, his name's Baldy. He walked up to me and he said, "Hey, my name's Baldy." And I said, "Hi, I'm balding." And just came to me. But, you know, God knows us. And he knows what we can and can't do on our own. But he uses us in spite of that. And that's why we must do three things knowing that God will use us. Number one, in 2 Corinthians 5:7, it says, "For we walk by faith and not by sight." Right? We walk by faith and not by sight. If we look at things, look at the mountains of impossibilities in front of us, we oftentimes will chicken out. I mean, if I would have looked at Afghanistan, what we did in that video, and said, okay, I'm going to get 12 friends, and we're going to go to Afghanistan, we're going to save 17,000 people right in the middle of the Taliban, we're going to be swimming across rivers right next to Taliban and Chinese and Russians, like, I would have been like, man, what am I thinking? No way, right? But we couldn't look at that. What we have to look at is God's calling us, God's burdening us to do it, and look at the faith that we have to have in God, not the impossibilities, because so many things that God will use you for are overwhelming and impossible, the things that he really wants to use you for. But we tend to only say yes to the things that seem tangible. We only say yes to the things that seem possible in our own capacity. But God doesn't want us to do things within our own capacity. He wants us to do things bigger than our capacity, God-sized things. And so we can't look at the thing, we have to look at the faith that we have in him. Number two, be obedient when he calls us. 1 Thessalonians 5:24 says, "He who calls you is faithful, and he will surely do it." So if God is calling you to do something, he's burdening your heart to do something, you believe in your heart like, man, God's stirring me to do this. God's burdening me to do this thing. If you believe that, then you should also believe that he has the ability to see it through. It may not look the way you want it to look. They may not get the result that you expect. But ultimately, if God's calling you to do it and he uses you to do it and you have faith in him, then he'll see it through. It'll be exactly what he wants it to be. And that's the right thing. So know that if he calls you to do it, he's going to see it through. I heard it said in ministry before, if it's God's will, it's God's bill. And that's someone that runs a ministry, that's a pretty comforting thing to actually believe. Number three, don't compare. We all do this. Galatians 6:4 speaks on it. It says, each one should test their own actions. Then they could take pride in themselves alone without comparing themselves to someone else. Theodore Roosevelt said this, comparison is the thief of joy. And so I don't think it's just the thief of joy. I think it's the thief of success. And it's the thief for Christians, it's the thief of glorifying God. We all, by nature, tend to compare ourselves with others. Afghanistan was a big thing. I know we look at it, we talk about it, I'm super proud of it. It was a big thing. But the size of the thing, or whatever the thing was, doesn't matter. What matters is whatever that thing is for you, whatever God's burdening your heart for, to be obedient to that, regardless of the size of it, right? Trust me, like, I'd be much more scared of going to work the children's ministry than going back and work Afghanistan. I'm equipped to go to Afghanistan, but I have 3 adult kids now. I know from my experience with them that I'm not equipped to work in the children's ministry. There's a lot of things that I'm not qualified for, and if you don't believe me, just ask my wife. She'll give you a list, right? We're all called to do different things, but the thing doesn't matter. The size of the thing doesn't matter. What matters is being obedient. God doesn't care about worldly accolades or measures of success. We do, but God doesn't care about that. We all get caught up in this. I'm like one of the most competitive people I know, so I confess I'm totally guilty of this. Everything for me is a competition and has goals and milestones, even in ministry. Like at the beginning of the year, I have my goals, I have my milestones, I have numbers, I have graphs and charts, and I'm like, we have to reach this many veterans and go to this many programs and raise this much money, and I'm setting it all up, and when we achieve it or exceed it, especially like when I see like 200% over, I'm like, yes, like we crushed it. God doesn't care about that stuff. We do, and it's important. It's important to be motivated and stuff and work hard. But what God cares about is us being obedient to Him. And then when we are obedient to Him for the things He burdens us for, to trust Him through the process. And then when we are successful, that we don't point to ourselves and say, look what we did. That we point to Him and give Him the glory for it, because that's where it belongs. That's what matters to God. Now, as it turns out, in most cases, the Bible is full of characters just like us. And definitely that is the case with this. In fact, the Bible is filled with heroes of the faith, men and women who faced moments to where God burdened their heart to do something, but as they stepped off to do it, they were either scared or felt unqualified to do exactly what God was calling them to do. But at some point, despite their inadequacies and despite their fears, they said yes. And one of those people was a man named Gideon, who I love the story of Gideon. He's one of my favorite characters in the Bible. After the Israelites entered the promised land, we see the Midianites heavily oppressed them. They killed the Israelites. They pillaged their homes, destroyed their crops, killed their livestock. They just totally oppressed them. And the people began to hide out in the countrysides. They lived in caves. The Israelites even stopped worshiping God because they thought God had abandoned them to the Midianites. And by the way, not to be confused with the Mennonites. The Mennonites are the good guys. They're actually pretty cool. But the Midianites, they're bad guys. Okay, so if you look throughout history at times of such oppression, whether you look at biblical history or go outside the Bible and just look at history in general, God always raises up warriors to stand and fight for people. And I don't mean just His people, just people in general. When people are oppressed, God always raises someone up to fight for people. And that's what I believe happened in Afghanistan. But when you look at who those people are, they're never the model warriors, right? When God calls them, they're never the model warriors. I mean, when you think about David and Goliath, the mighty King David didn't slay Goliath. God didn't do it that way. He did it when he was a little boy, when he was a little shepherd, puny shepherd boy. That's when he slayed Goliath, so that God would get the glory, right? In Afghanistan, like super proud of our team, some cool guys. But you've seen some of those guys in that video. We have, I'm out there with a busted groin. Most of the guys are in their 40s. Got Santa 6. We called him Santa 6 because he's a big gray beard because he's like 60 years old, right? We wasn't the A-team. There was some better looking group of guys that could have been out there doing it. God wanted to get the credit for that, and he does, right? And this is this case with Gideon. Gideon was not the model warrior. In fact, the Bible says all the odds were stacked against Gideon. He was the weakest member of his family from the weakest tribe in Israel, and he was scared. How do we know he was scared? Because as the Bible introduces him, he's hiding in a wine press, sifting out wheat. Now, I never sifted wheat before, but apparently when you separate the wheat from the chaff, you're out in the open and you're beating the wheat, and the wind could take the chaff away, so you're left with the seeds, right? So that's what would take place there. And that's, instead of him being out in the open, he was hiding in a wine press, in a cave, because he didn't want to be caught by the Midianites. And in Judges 6:12 through 16, we see the Lord have this encounter with Gideon, and where he's hiding there. And it says this: the angel of the Lord appeared to Gideon, and he said, "The Lord is with you, mighty warrior." He calls him a mighty warrior. And Gideon's like, "Pardon me?" He said, "Pardon me, Lord. But if the Lord is with us, why has all this happened to me? Or happened to us? Where are all the wonders that our ancestors told us about when they said, did not the Lord bring us up out of Egypt? But now the Lord has abandoned us and given us into the hand of Midian." The Lord turned to him and said, "Go in the strength you have and save Israel from Midian's hands. Am I not sending you?" "Pardon me, my Lord," Gideon said again. "But how can I save Israel? My clan is the weakest in Manasseh, and I'm the weakest in my family." The Lord answered him, "I will be with you, and you will strike down all the Midianites, leaving none alive." Right? God's saying, I'm calling you. And Gideon literally starts an argument with God, saying he's not qualified. He's like, "Who, me? Like, you came to the wrong address. Like, you got the wrong guy. I'm not your guy. I'm not qualified. I'm not strong enough. I can't do this." And God answers him, "Am I not sending you?" Right? Am I not sending you? God was using the unexpected to do the unimaginable. And in my life, in your life, Gideon's life, God will use us, the unexpected, to do unimaginable things, the things that seem impossible, so that he'll get the glory, right? Gideon chose to say yes to God. And so he did what any of us would do. He got as many of his friends as he can. And he got 32,000 of them. I don't know how long it took, but he got 32,000 of them. Apparently he has more friends than me. I only got 12. He got 32,000. And it sounds like a lot. He got a good force together, but it wasn't, because he was facing a Midianite army of 135,000. So that's 4-to-1 odds, right? 4-to-1 odds. And you know what God told Gideon? You gathered too many, right? You gathered too many. Now I'm sure Gideon thought like, man, how could I have too many? It's 4-to-1 odds. But when you think about it, and God wanting that glory for it, I mean, even with 32,000, 4-to-1, maybe he had a good strategy. Maybe he was a good strategist, like maybe like King Leonidas in the battle with Thermopylae, right? 300 men, they had a good strategy. It took them to the hot gates. Maybe Gideon could get the credit for something like that. I mean, in Afghanistan, the truth is, I wish the United States military at the time would have been able to do what we did. They would have probably did it better. But then the United States military would have got the credit. But because the 12 of us did it, we were only able to give the credit to God, and that's how God orchestrated it. And that's what he wanted here. That's what he wanted in this situation. So God told Gideon to send home any fighters who were scared. Now, apparently a lot of them were scared because 22,000 left. And Gideon was only left with 10,000. And now he has 14-to-1 odds. You know what God says? Still too many, right? You got to send some back. And so I can imagine what Gideon was thinking. What in the world, God? Like, I already told you I'm the least qualified. This is an impossible thing. And then I get all these people together and you dismantle it. Like, what do you want from me? And God says, send them down to the river. And whichever men that you see drinking water out of their hands, lapping it like dogs with their tongues, those are the men you want. But the ones who stick their face down in the water and drink, we're going to send those home. 9,700 men stuck their face down in the water and drank water. The other 300 put their hands down in cupped hands and licked water out of their palm of their hand. Now, you don't have to be a military strategist to know that, right? This is to alert people. They can look around. Those who stick their face in the water are not alert. And that's what God did. He sent those 9,700 home. Gideon's left with 300 men now. And now God says, right, the time has come to go in battle with your 300 men. But you know, God knows our hearts and he knows our fears. And he didn't always want us to, sometimes he wants us to have some comfort. And in this case, God told Gideon, if you're still scared, which he was, then I'm going to give you a sign. Now, Gideon was still scared because he's 300 men facing a 135,000 man army. I mean, these are the same people that had him oppressed for 10 years. This is the people he was hiding from in the beginning of the story down in this wine press. The Bible says that there were so many that they were as thick as locusts, that they couldn't be counted any more than the sands on the seashore. Like, Gideon was scared. So God tells him, if you're afraid to attack, go to the Midianite camp, sneak in, and listen to what they're saying. So Gideon gets a servant, and the two of them sneak into the camp, and they overhear two Midianite soldiers talking. And one of them says, I had a dream that God gave Gideon victory over us. And when Gideon heard that, it was everything he needed to hear to be reassured and motivated. And he hit his knees and he started worshiping God. And then he went back to his 300 men and he said, get up. The Lord has given the Midianite camp into our hands. And the men went and they surrounded the Midianite camp. And they sounded the trumpet, and as they closed in on them, they shouted for the Lord and for Gideon. In the darkness, the Midianites panicked, and they started killing everyone they could see, which was themselves. They were killing each other, fighting. And as they're fighting and killing themselves, Gideon and his men went in and cleaned up the remainder of the troops, and Gideon himself killed the two kings. And ultimately, because of Gideon's obedience to God, he gave Israel and God a victory that would restore Israel in that time. And we see Israel go through this over and over and over again. But in this moment, Gideon trusted God, facing impossible mission, knowing that he was unqualified. And then God gives us a lesson and shows us that true victory comes from his hands and not ours. Both Gideon and myself, we had our moments of self-doubt. God, there has to be a better choice than me. And I'm sure you've said that before in different areas of your life. God, there has to be a better choice than me. But Gideon had one thing in his control. He had a choice. I have a choice. And you have a choice. We can simply choose to, as Gideon did, say yes to God. to disregard our fears, disregard our inadequacies, and simply be obedient to the things that God's burdened our hearts to do. We won't know how it's going to turn out. Right? I didn't know how Afghanistan was going to turn out. I'm thankful we had success. I'm thankful everyone got home safe. But the truth is, it didn't turn out the way I wanted it to. 17,000 sounds like a lot. We've got a lot of accolades and pats on the back. But I have 50,000 requests at the time we stopped. 50,000 requests for help. And we got 17,000. I still get emails every day of people that are like, my husband was killed. It's me and my daughters here. Come and save us. Please don't leave us here. They send him, that's just trend thing that picked up that they knew they'd get pull my heartstrings, but they send little girls have pictures. Chad, please save me. I get those emails. It's not the way I want it to work out. There's 20 million women and little girls there that are going to be sex slaves. But we just have to be obedient to what God calls us to do, and it's going to work out the way He wants it to work out in His timing. There's things beyond us individually. So we may all think it's about us, but God has a bigger plan. Gideon didn't know if it was going to work out. He was just obedient. The truth is, if we really think about it, there's been many followers of Christ through the years and through history that have done exactly what God asked them to do, and it didn't turn out well. In fact, they died doing exactly what God called them to do. Look at the apostles. But that isn't the point, right? The point isn't about our assurances. The point isn't about our safety. The point isn't about our personal victories. The point is obedience. And in the big picture, outside of our world and ourselves, that's where victory really comes for the kingdom. If we could get this on a personal level, could you imagine what it would be like if we lived this way? If we trusted God that boldly in every area of our lives, to work in our lives that way? As I'm preparing this message, I'll be honest, I was convicted. Because I was preparing this message and thinking the boldness to say yes to God for Afghanistan, the things I say yes to God for in Mighty Oaks. There's a lot of areas in my life on a personal level that I don't say yes to God to. And I'm like, what if I could have this same boldness to say yes to God in all areas of my life? How different would my life be, right? It's not always about personal accomplishments and victories, even in ministry. It's about saying yes to God, letting Him use us to change the world and putting a spotlight on Him for everyone to see. If we could get that, what would our homes look like? What would our churches look like? Our communities, this country? The truth is we can. We can if we're intentional about it. If we could simply put those fears aside, reject our past and those things that we speak in ourselves and allow the enemy to speak in us and lean forward into all the things that God's burdened our hearts for. The Apostle Paul got this. And if anybody wouldn't have got this or felt disqualified, it would have been him. I won't go into a whole sermon about the Apostle Paul, but if you guys know about Paul, before Paul, he was Saul. And when he was Saul, he murdered and killed Christians. He persecuted Christians. That's what he did. That was his job. And even despite his past, instead of letting it disqualify him, he said this in Philippians 3, verses 13 through 4. It's one of my favorite verses in the Bible. It says, "Brothers, I do not consider that I have made it my own, but one thing I do know is this: forgetting what lies behind me and straining forward to what lies ahead, I press on towards the goal of the prize of the upward call of God in Christ Jesus." Right? What Paul was saying here is, I don't have it all figured out, but one thing I do know is this: I will not let my past hold me back from the things and work that God has me to do. He wasn't going to let his past hold him back, and he had a bad one, worse than most of ours, right? So what's holding you back? Right? What's holding us back? We need to let it go and say yes to the things that God's burdened our heart for, so that God could do what only He does through you. Can we pray? Lord, I thank You for this church. I thank You for Pastor Ron. I pray for him and Kelly while they're out speaking today. Thank You for this community, Lord, and all the people here. Lord, I pray for each of us individually, that You would be so amazing that You would not just create us, Lord, but You would create us for purpose. If we have breath in our lungs, Lord, that You'll still use us, and that You take the time to burden our hearts to be allowed to be part of Your plan for humanity. Lord, let us hear that burden that You put in our hearts. Let's feel that calling You put in our hearts and hear it louder than the voice of the enemy. Hear it louder than the voice of self-doubt that we speak to ourselves, Lord. That the way we could boldly say yes to the things You called us to do, that we could trust and have faith that You're going to see it through, Lord. And that when we do find success, Lord, that we'll point to You and give glory to you in order to be able to reach others so others will see the amazing works that you'll do for the creation that you let us be part of, Lord. I'm just so thankful for you, Lord, and so thankful for the work that we've got to do. And I pray for those still in Afghanistan. I pray for those in Ukraine right now and those families. And I pray for all of our families on this Memorial Day who have lost their loved ones and who have lost friends. Lord, I just pray for all of them today. In Jesus' name, amen. Well, before I step off, I want to say one more thing. All this started for me with Aziz, my interpreter, my friend. And after 8.5 months of Aziz, his wife, and 6 kids, being in a humanitarian center, just 3.5 weeks ago, they came to Texas, and they're living in Texas with us now. We hired them on at Mighty Oaks. In fact, Aziz and his wife and children at my home church today, and my vision for Aziz is that he'll be speaking in churches around the world one day, sharing his amazing story, which is an incredible story of how God orchestrated his life. One of the things he said I want to share with you when he came home, right when he came to America, the first thing he said was, and it was pretty profound, he said, all these 6 years that we prayed together, because we had prayed together before, for him to come to America and God didn't answer those prayers, it was because we weren't praying for his timing. This is someone that went through complete oppression to make it to America and gave up a lot. He's like, it wasn't God's timing. He said, if I would have came to America during those 6 years, then I wouldn't have been in Afghanistan, and you wouldn't have came and get me, and those 17,000 people would have been left there. He's seen God's big picture and got it, and it was a lesson for me. I'm like, I didn't even see that, you know, and man, he's just such an amazing, amazing human being to recognize God's timing and God's big overall plan. Well, after getting Aziz back, one of the things I've been involved in outside of Afghanistan has been Ukraine. You know, Mother Teresa had this quote that I always think about. She said, God will never give me more than I can handle. I just wish he didn't trust me so much. And that's been my last year. And Ukraine kicked off, we knew we had to respond and help in Ukraine. We already had someone on the ground before the invasion. I went there the week after the invasion. We did a lot with the rescues there. We rescued Benjamin Hall, the Fox News reporter, who was catastrophically injured. We went in and got him the night he was injured and got him safe out of Ukraine. I went back a few days later and drove out Pierre, his cameraman's body, and delivered him with dignity to his wife. And then we rescued several other groups of people. Mainly, the biggest group was some handicapped kids that were, most of them were killed in a bomb shelter, so we rescued the survivors. And then it's kind of developed over some time to where Mighty Oaks has been asked to do what Mighty Oaks is best at, and that's providing spiritual resiliency to the troops. Mainly, we've done it here to U.S. troops. About 6 years ago, we started doing it internationally. COVID has slowed us down, but now we have a request from the Ukrainian government to go and speak to the frontline troops and help them provide them with the spiritual resiliency programs that Mighty Oaks does. And why that's really significant is this. Thank you. Those troops in Ukraine believe, and I believe with them, that it's a good versus evil scenario. It's a light versus darkness, and they believe that God is actually miraculously giving them victories. They're seeing victories in the battlefield that can't be explained in the ways that I talked about today. And they believe that God is orchestrating this. And the leaders don't want the troops to lose that. So you're like, we need you to go there and remind them. Because it's hard to remember sometimes when your buddies are dying that God's really there. Even though you see miraculous things happen and your buddy dies. So they want us to be able to go there and keep that alive for them. And so it's a very honorable request. It's a request that we're going to respond to. And so Mighty Oaks International is going to be sending teams to places like Kharkiv and Mariupol on the borders and where they're fighting and bring that spiritual message of spiritual resiliency to them. And we had this chaplain there that we asked, hey, will you shoot a little selfie video just so our supporters know that we're out here doing this and hear from you. And it took like a week and a half, and I'm like, oh man, he's not gonna send a video. And then we got this really incredible video that I sent to Pastor Ron, and Pastor Ron's like, you have to share with the church, because you guys, if you don't know, are part of this effort and getting behind us. So we have this video, we're gonna play it. I'll step off while the video's playing. So thank you guys so much. Good to see you, God bless you all. Thank you. Thanks so much, guys.
Церковь Скиния с 2014 года постоянно служит военнослужащим. Когда началась агрессия Российской Федерации, когда был отобран Крым и на Донбассе началась война, наши капелланы поехали туда и начали служение солдатам, военнослужащим. Сейчас у нас есть капелланы, которые 24/7 служат военнослужащим. Они штатные капелланы вооруженных сил Украины. С момента полномасштабного вторжения Российской Федерации наша церковь еще более усиленно, и капелланы более усиленно начали служить военнослужащим и гражданскому населению. Наша задача, чтобы наши военнослужащие, которые находятся на войне, оставались людьми, чтобы ужасы и тяготы войны, чтобы зло, которое несет в себе война, чтобы оно не поселялось в их сердцах, в их душах, чтобы они знали, что они просто делают свою работу, как солдаты. Солдаты — это работа. Это не очень просто, но с Божьей помощью мы стараемся это делать. Хочу выразить надежду на сотрудничество с благотворительной организацией «Могучие дубы». Пусть Бог благословит вас, и мы будем очень рады совместно служить народу Украины, служить вооруженным силам Украины и приносить пользу в те места, куда Бог пошлет нас. Спасибо.
Aren't you thankful for Chad and the heart that he has for God and the heart to follow God obediently for every place he can go? Hey, we are strong supporters of Mighty Oaks International as a church family, and we're going to have an opportunity today to take a Neighbors and Nations offering for that. If you didn't come prepared today, don't let today pass before you go ahead and use one of these digital ways if you're not able to do that here in the room. But I want to invite the ushers forward. We're going to take this offering before we go today. And all that you give today, if you'll just mark on that line or in the memo on the digital side, if you'll say Neighbors and Nations, everything that's given over these next couple of days is going to go to Mighty Oaks. And it's going to give us an opportunity to support what they've already been doing and the things that they're getting to do in Ukraine and beyond. I'm just amazed. We've been on this journey, I believe, probably 8 or 9 years or longer as a church. And every time he comes, there's something that God is moving to the next step. And we get to be a part of that. And it's so much in vision for what our church is about, of serving neighbors and nations. And so we've gone on this journey with him, and we've watched God bless him as we've been obedient to give into the ministry that he's doing there. So I want to go ahead and invite the ushers to pass the buckets here. Again, this is a great opportunity we have today to give, but don't let today pass if you didn't come prepared on Memorial Weekend to give. Let's make sure that we get that in the offering this week so that we can get a great response for him to move forward in all that God's opening the door for him. As the buckets pass your row, if you want to go ahead and stand, we're going to have a closing prayer in just a moment, but as the buckets pass, let's go ahead and stand. That'll let me know that you have been reached with the offering, and that will give us an opportunity to close out the day today. One more time before we go to prayer, let's give the Lord praise for what he is doing through Chad and Mighty Oaks. God is a good God. And that message today about Gideon and God finding him and calling him a hero like that, even before he was a hero, can speak to us today. God is speaking to us. So I want to pray about next steps for us as we step into the week that we're going into. Let's pray. Lord, I just thank you today for being encouraged by what you're doing through lives of people who are obedient to you, through your word, through Chad's example and the other guys that were on that team. God, I thank you for modern examples of heroes of faith. And I pray today, God, that you're going to cause us to reflect in our own life, listen to your still small voice, God, and take those steps you're calling for us to be obedient in. And Lord, I thank you, you're going to guide us. I thank you for your grace and your mercy as we go forward. And I thank you for the unfolding plan of God that you have for us individually, for our families, and for this church. And we thank you for the opportunity we have to serve you. Lord, just go with us today, guide us through this week, and bring us back safe next week. In Jesus' name, amen. Everybody have a great Memorial Day.